On March 15, 2019, at 11:47 p.m., Dubai police responded to an emergency at Block 7, Building C, Qusais. Inside apartment 304, walls were stained with blood, and the kitchen floor bore evidence of a violent struggle. 3 victims were discovered with serious injuries. 2 family members rushed to Dubai hospital with life-threatening wounds, and 1 woman taken into custody covered in blood, the kitchen knife still at her feet. What started as a family confrontation had ended with a mother and son hospitalized, a domestic worker in handcuffs, and a man standing paralyzed between his bleeding wife and the woman he had claimed to love. Yet the most bewildering aspect wasn't the violence itself. It was the location. How did members of Dubai's most prominent business families end up in a blood-soaked apartment that, according to official records, none of them were supposed to know existed? The answers would emerge over the following weeks as investigators peeled back 8 years of carefully constructed deception. What they discovered was a hidden world operating parallel to Dubai's glittering expatriate society, where desperate choices and impossible circumstances had created a powder keg that finally exploded in the cramped confines of apartment 304. Tamer Hadad commanded respect in Dubai's construction industry at 52. Standing 6 feet tall with salt and pepper hair and a precisely trimmed beard, he embodied the successful Lebanese businessman who had thrived during Dubai's post-2010 economic recovery. As CEO of Hadad Construction International, he had built an empire worth AED 180 million through strategic government contracts and luxury developments. His company's headquarters in Dubai International Financial Center showcased floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline his projects had helped shape. Hadad Construction had delivered 3 shopping complexes in Dubai Marina, 2 hotel developments in downtown Dubai, and residential towers across Jumeirah Lakes Towers. His office walls displayed photographs with government ministers, royal family members, and charity events where his philanthropy enhanced both business relationships and social standing. At the Emirates Golf Club, Tamer was known for balancing traditional Lebanese values with contemporary business acumen. His Friday afternoon gatherings included discussions that seamlessly moved from construction contracts to cultural preservation, demonstrating the sophisticated networking that characterized Dubai's elite business community. Forbes Middle East valued his net worth at AED 180 million across real estate, construction assets, and diversified investments. Yet despite this wealth, Tamer pursued new projects with relentless ambition, driven by something deeper than financial necessity. Amal had brought diplomatic sophistication to their 1994 marriage, which Cairo's social pages had celebrated as uniting 2 prominent regional families. 25 years later, she wielded considerable soft power through charity work that genuinely benefited Dubai's development goals while enhancing her family's social position. Their Emirates Hills villa represented careful investment in both comfort and status. The AED 25 million property featured traditional Arabic architectural elements enhanced by modern amenities: marble bathrooms, infinity pool, manicured gardens maintained with precision that reflected their attention to detail and social expectations. Amal's charitable activities extended beyond social obligation to meaningful impact. Her breast cancer awareness initiatives had funded medical equipment for Dubai Hospital, while her education programs provided scholarships that created lasting change. Society photographers documented her presence at cultural events where her participation signaled both taste and substance. Their children embodied successful cultural integration. Khalil, 22, pursued his MBA at London Business School while maintaining strong connections to his Lebanese heritage. His social media presence balanced European academic achievement with Gulf family traditions, inspiring thousands of young Arab professionals navigating similar paths. Yasmin, 19, studied international relations at American University of Dubai, preparing for diplomatic service that would honor her maternal grandfather's legacy. Her academic excellence and student leadership suggested inherited political instincts that would serve her well in regional diplomacy. The family's social calendar reflected their position within Dubai's power structure. Thursday dinners often included cabinet ministers discussing infrastructure projects, banking executives exploring financing opportunities, and cultural attaches planning exhibitions. Their annual Ramadan iftars created networks that transcended entertainment to become platforms for meaningful collaboration. International properties in Gushtad and London served strategic purposes beyond vacation escapes. The Swiss chalet allowed Tamer to maintain European business relationships during Dubai's crushing summer months, while the Knightsbridge townhouse supported Khalil's education and Amal's cultural connections. By 2011, subtle tensions had emerged beneath their orchestrated perfection. Amal's increasing focus on public service sometimes conflicted with Tamer's business demands for social availability. His expanding international projects required extended travel that left her managing family obligations independently. Their marriage remained genuinely affectionate but had evolved into a sophisticated partnership where individual ambitions occasionally strained collective unity. Into this environment arrived Rowena Cruz in February 2011, recruited through a Manila agency specializing in elite household placement. At 29, she possessed qualifications that distinguished her from typical domestic help: a nursing degree from the University of the Philippines, 5 years of hospital experience, and English fluency developed through dedicated study during off-duty hours. Rowena's journey followed patterns familiar to hundreds of thousands of Filipino overseas workers. As the eldest of 6 children in Bataan province, she had supported her family through nursing work, but the financial mathematics remained impossible. Her PHP 18,000 monthly salary covered basic expenses with nothing remaining for emergencies, education, or the improvements that might lift her family from rural poverty. The Dubai opportunity promised AED 2,500 monthly plus accommodation and benefits, nearly 6 times her Philippines earnings. The recruitment agency described working conditions that seemed almost too good to believe: sophisticated families, professional respect, and savings potential that could transform her family's circumstances within a few years. Her interview with Amal took place at the family's DIFC office, designed to assess both professional capabilities and cultural adaptability. Rowena's nursing background impressed Amal, particularly given Tamer's elderly mother's need for medical attention and medication management. Her respectful demeanor and professional competence suggested someone who would integrate smoothly without disrupting established household rhythms. The employment contract specified primary responsibility for Khalil, Tamer's 78-year-old mother, whose diabetes and arthritis required daily monitoring, medication administration, and mobility assistance. Secondary duties included light housekeeping and meal preparation support. Her accommodation would be a modest room in the villa's service quarters, with Thursday afternoons and Friday mornings designated as personal time. Rowena's initial weeks passed smoothly as she adapted to routines dramatically different from her Philippines experience. The villa's scale initially intimidated her, but the family's respectful treatment and clear expectations created comfortable working relationships. Khalil proved to be a gentle patient who appreciated Rowena's professional care and gradually shared stories about Lebanese traditions. The household's other staff, Pakistani driver, Indonesian cook, part-time gardening crew, welcomed Rowena with camaraderie common among foreign workers navigating similar challenges. They shared practical advice about Dubai's systems, recommended affordable shopping areas, and provided social connections that eased the isolation inherent in domestic employment. During these early months, Rowena noticed Tamer's attention in ways that seemed to extend beyond normal employer courtesy. He would inquire about her comfort, suggest schedule adjustments when his mother's condition allowed flexibility, and engage in conversations about her educational background that revealed genuine interest in her capabilities beyond domestic duties. By June 2011, the household had established patterns that seemed sustainable and mutually beneficial. Rowena's nursing skills had improved Khalil's quality of life while reducing family stress about elderly care. Her efficiency freed Amal to focus on charity work without worrying about household management. The respectful treatment and fair compensation created the positive working environment Rowena had hoped to find. None of them anticipated how quickly this harmony would shatter, or how the fragments would lead to the blood-stained apartment in Qusais where their perfect facade would finally, violently collapse. Act 2. The Forbidden Discovery. Dubai's June heat had driven most residents indoors by 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, June 23, 2011. Amal navigated her Range Rover through Emirates Hills gates, returning earlier than expected from her ladies' committee luncheon at the Burj Al Arab. The charity planning session had concluded when 3 members received urgent school emergency calls, leaving insufficient numbers for meaningful discussion. The villa's climate control hummed steadily as Amal entered, expecting the familiar afternoon quiet that settled during Dubai's most punishing hours. The Indonesian cook prepared dinner ingredients while the Pakistani driver maintained the family vehicles. Khalil typically napped during these hours, her medication schedule designed around Dubai's brutal summer rhythm. Something felt different in the carefully orchestrated domestic harmony. Perhaps it was unusual silence from the upper floor, or shadows falling differently through windows normally closed against afternoon sun. Her instincts, sharpened by years of managing household staff and social obligations, detected subtle variations in the villa's patterns. Climbing the curved marble staircase toward the master suite, Amal noticed Khalil's door remained closed, appropriate for nap time, but Rowena's service room stood slightly ajar. The Filipino caretaker was typically precise about privacy, keeping her personal space secured when absent. The deviation struck Amal as worth investigating, particularly given recent subtle changes in household dynamics. The discovery beyond Rowena's partially open door would shatter both her afternoon tranquility and the foundation of trust upon which their domestic security depended. Standing before her modest dresser mirror, wearing Amal's cream-colored Chanel dress, worn to last month's diplomatic reception, was the Filipino caretaker. The dress, worth more than Rowena's annual salary, hung differently on her smaller frame, but the transformation was unmistakable. Around her neck glittered Amal's grandmother's diamond necklace, a family heirloom spanning 3 generations. On her wrists sparkled the Cartier tennis bracelet Tamer had presented for their 20th anniversary. Rowena practiced poses in the mirror, her movements suggesting familiarity with expensive clothing and jewelry. She adjusted the necklace's position with careful attention to how it caught afternoon light through her small window. Her expression reflected not guilt or nervousness, but dreamy satisfaction, as if imagining herself belonging to the world these items represented. The confrontation erupted with volcanic intensity. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Amal's voice cut through the stillness like shattered glass. Arabic words came first, followed by English as diplomatic training engaged even during profound shock. "Those are my personal belongings. How dare you touch them?" Rowena spun around, color draining from her face, as fantasy collapsed into devastating reality. The Chanel dress suddenly felt like accusatory evidence, while the jewelry seemed to burn with transgression's weight. Her hands moved instinctively to remove the necklace, but trembling fingers couldn't manage the clasp. "Ma'am, I can explain," Rowena stammered, voice barely above a whisper. "I was cleaning and wanted to understand proper care. I studied them to ensure appropriate handling." The explanation sounded hollow even to her, practiced English failing to mask her position's fundamental absurdity. Amal's fury transcended language barriers and cultural differences. Never had she experienced such complete violation of personal boundaries within her own home. The items Rowena wore represented not just monetary value, but generational heritage and intimate memories. The Chanel dress had been selected for events representing family dignity. Her grandmother's necklace carried emotional significance no money could replace. "Cleaning." Amal's voice rose with incredulity. "You clean my jewelry by wearing it? Handle my clothing by putting it on?" Questions emerged as disbelief rather than genuine inquiry. "Remove those items immediately and explain how you accessed my private dressing room." What followed proved more disturbing than the initial discovery. Rowena's access hadn't required breaking locks or overcoming security. A spare key to the master suite, supposedly known only to Amal and Tamer, had enabled entry during the family's absence. The key, Rowena claimed through tears, had been provided by Tamer for emergency access to Khalil's medications stored in their bedroom's climate-controlled safe. Within 30 minutes, the villa's main salon had transformed into an impromptu tribunal where Amal presided over proceedings determining Rowena's fate. Indonesian cook, Pakistani driver, and housekeeping staff were summoned to witness formal accusations against their colleague. Their presence ensured transparency, provided example against future incidents, and created witnesses to whatever decisions would be reached. Amal's diplomatic training served her well in methodically presenting charges. Unauthorized entry into private family quarters violated the fundamental boundary between employer and domestic staff. Theft of personal property, even temporary theft for wearing rather than selling, constituted criminal behavior that could involve police and immediate deportation. Breach of trust destroyed the foundation upon which safe domestic employment depended. Cultural dynamics underlying the confrontation added complexity transcending simple employer-employee disputes. Amal represented not just personal authority, but broader social hierarchy governing relationships between Gulf families and foreign domestic workers. Her Egyptian diplomatic background provided sophisticated understanding of power structures, legal frameworks, and international implications. Rowena embodied vulnerability of hundreds of thousands of Filipino overseas workers whose legal status, economic survival, and family welfare depended entirely on employer goodwill. Rowena's defense emerged through broken sentences mixing English and Tagalog phrases, revealing her emotional devastation. She had never intended theft or disrespect. Her curiosity about fine items reflected natural human desires rather than criminal intent. The key had indeed been provided by Tamer for legitimate medical emergencies. Her wearing Amal's belongings represented momentary lapse in judgment rather than systematic deception. Yet even speaking, Rowena recognized her position's fundamental weakness. Dubai's legal system provided limited protections for domestic workers facing such accusations. Her visa status remained entirely dependent on Hadad family sponsorship, meaning immediate termination would require finding new employment within 30 days or face deportation. Her savings after 4 months totaled less than AED 5,000, insufficient for extended job searching while covering accommodation and living expenses. Other staff members watched with mixture of sympathy and self-preservation. They understood Rowena's attraction to beautiful items surrounding their daily work, but recognized catastrophic consequences of crossing employment boundaries. Their own families depended on continued employment, making solidarity with Rowena a luxury they couldn't afford. Amal's decision came with swift finality, reflecting both anger and practical household management understanding. Rowena would be terminated immediately without severance or positive references. She had 24 hours to collect belongings and vacate service quarters. Transportation to temporary accommodation would be provided, but all future employment, housing, and repatriation arrangements would become her personal responsibility. The dismissal unfolded with mechanical efficiency contrasting sharply with underlying emotional trauma. Rowena's possessions, mostly clothing from affordable Dara shops, fit easily into 2 suitcases that had carried her hopes from Manila 4 months earlier. Other staff avoided direct eye contact while she packed, their silence reflecting both sympathy and relief at escaping similar fate. Tamer's absence during the crisis proved strategically convenient. A business trip to Abu Dhabi for government contract negotiations provided plausible deniability regarding knowledge of Rowena's actions or family quarters access. His return would find the matter resolved, household restored to proper order, with no requirement for uncomfortable domestic staff management discussions. The taxi ride to shared Dara accommodation represented Rowena's descent from Emirates Hills' rarefied atmosphere to harsh realities facing unemployed domestic workers. The building housed dozens of women in similar circumstances: Filipinas, Indonesians, Sri Lankans, Bangladeshis who had lost employment and desperately sought new positions before visa grace periods expired. What none understood was that Rowena's dismissal had been orchestrated with precision far beyond Amal's spontaneous discovery. The spare key, timing of Amal's early return, even Rowena's access to specific items creating maximum outrage. All had been carefully arranged to achieve an outcome appearing accidental but serving deeper purposes that would only become clear in months following. Tamer had spent weeks studying household patterns, his wife's schedule, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited to create plausible circumstances for Rowena's dismissal. His growing attraction to the Filipino caretaker had reached levels threatening family stability and social reputation. Rather than address these feelings directly or remove himself from temptation, he had chosen a more complex solution, eliminating the source of distraction while maintaining his image as innocent victim of domestic staff betrayal. The key provided to Rowena was real, as was his instruction to check bedroom items. But his careful manipulation of her natural curiosity about fine things, combined with precise timing information about Amal's schedule, had created circumstances making discovery inevitable. The resulting confrontation would serve his needs perfectly. Removing Rowena from daily environment while ensuring future contact would appear charitable assistance to wrongfully dismissed employee. As Rowena's taxi disappeared into evening traffic, carrying her toward uncertain future in overcrowded Dara buildings, Tamer was already planning his carefully constructed deception's next phase. Within weeks, he would begin locating and contacting her, ostensibly offering assistance and making amends for unfair treatment. What began as apparent kindness would evolve into something far more complex and ultimately destructive. The Hadad family's perfect facade remained intact, reputation protected by Amal's swift, decisive action. Yet beneath restored domestic tranquility, forces had been set in motion that would lead, 8 years later, to the blood-stained Qusais apartment where all their carefully constructed lies would finally violently collapse. Building 47's concrete corridors in Dara's labor accommodation district echoed with desperation during July 2011. Rowena Cruz had shared room 3C's cramped space with 4 other dismissed Filipinas for 3 weeks. Each morning brought the same ritual of lobby lineups, hoping for any work preventing deportation. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening. A familiar voice, carefully disguised, offered assistance and suggested meeting at City Center Mall's food court. Tamer Hadad appeared at exactly 3 p.m., dressed casually and visibly nervous. Sitting across from her, he glanced around repeatedly before speaking. "I've been feeling terrible about what happened," he began. "There was a misunderstanding that I should have prevented." During Rowena's months in their household, Tamer had found himself increasingly aware of her presence. Her gentle efficiency with his mother, her quiet competence, her respectful manner. All had stirred feelings he hadn't experienced since his early marriage. When she brought medications to family areas, he would create reasons to linger, asking about Khalil's condition while observing Rowena's professional dedication. The incident with Amal's clothing had provided his opportunity. He had deliberately given Rowena access, knowing his wife's schedule, calculating timing that would lead to discovery. The dismissal removed growing temptation while positioning him as her potential rescuer, a role that satisfied both his guilt and his desire to maintain contact. "My wife reacted protectively without understanding the full situation," he explained carefully. "I want to help correct this injustice." Rowena listened with wariness born of desperate circumstances. His offer of AED 3,000 immediate assistance seemed providential, yet something felt calculated about his approach, too convenient for coincidence. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly, searching his face for truth. "Because what happened was unfair," Tamer replied, meeting her eyes briefly. "You were an excellent employee. The circumstances were complicated." She noticed his emphasis on complicated, suggesting meanings beyond the obvious. But with savings nearly exhausted and deportation looming, questioning his motives seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Her family's financial dependence on her employment made any opportunity worth considering. Within 2 weeks, he had located an Qusais apartment. The modest unit would cost AED 8,000 monthly, plus AED 5,000 for living expenses, far exceeding any domestic worker's earning capacity. "Consider it compensation for unfair dismissal," Tamer explained during their second meeting, "until you find proper employment that values your qualifications." Rowena accepted, though unease gnawed at her. The arrangement felt too generous, too perfectly timed. When she mentioned concerns to roommates, they urged caution but acknowledged her impossible situation and her family's growing needs. The apartment became Tamer's evening destination. His visits, occurring between 7 and 9 p.m., initially resembled welfare checks from a guilty former employer. He brought groceries, asked about her comfort, ensured she had everything needed for basic living. Gradually, visits grew longer. Conversations moved beyond practical matters to personal stories. Tamer spoke about business pressures, family expectations that sometimes felt overwhelming, the loneliness that accompanied success in Dubai's competitive environment. Rowena found herself responding with her own struggles. Homesickness that satellite television couldn't cure, worry about her family's finances, uncertainty about her future in a country where her professional qualifications seemed irrelevant. "You understand pressures my wife has never faced," he said one evening in October. "She's never worried about supporting multiple families or making sacrifices for others' welfare." Rowena felt flattered by his confidence but troubled by how easily he criticized his wife. The comparison made her uncomfortable, suggesting undercurrents she didn't want to acknowledge or encourage. As weeks passed, his support enabled monthly remittances to the Philippines that transformed her family's circumstances dramatically. Her siblings could attend university, her parents received medical care, the family purchased land providing long-term security. Progress reports from home included photographs of her brother's graduation, her mother's successful surgery, the modest house they were building. "Your family is prospering because of our arrangement," Tamer observed during one visit. "They've come to depend on this support for their improved lifestyle." The statement carried warning undertones disguised as observation. Rowena began understanding that her growing dependence extended beyond personal survival to encompass her entire family's welfare, a responsibility that made leaving the arrangement increasingly difficult regardless of its questionable nature. Ground rules emerged gradually through Tamer's suggestions presented as protective measures. She should avoid social media to prevent former employers from tracking her location. Contact with the Filipino community should remain minimal to avoid questions about her employment situation that might attract unwanted attention. A separate phone appeared for their exclusive communication, with instructions about coded language and scheduled call times that would avoid detection. Each restriction was presented as protection for her privacy, their arrangement's discretion, her future opportunities. But the cumulative effect was increasing isolation from any support system that might offer perspective on her situation or alternatives to continued dependence on Tamer's support. By December, Rowena realized she had become completely dependent on Tamer's assistance. Her nursing qualifications remained unused, her social connections had withered, and her legal status existed entirely at his discretion. The apartment's comfort masked the reality of her increasingly trapped circumstances. During one evening visit, as they watched Filipino television programs he had arranged through her satellite package, Tamer moved closer on the sofa. "You've made my life bearable," he said softly. "These evenings are the only time I feel truly understood and appreciated." Rowena felt his hand brush against hers and didn't pull away. The gesture felt inevitable after months of building emotional intimacy. Yet she understood it crossed a threshold that would fundamentally change everything between them. "What about your family?" she whispered, recognizing the question's inadequacy but needing to voice it. "They don't understand me the way you do," he replied, fingers intertwining with hers. "This feels more genuine than anything in my other life." As their relationship shifted from patron-dependent to something more intimate, Rowena experienced conflicting emotions that kept her awake at night. Gratitude for his support mixed with unease about his motives. Attraction battled with recognition of manipulation. Hope for genuine connection competed with awareness of her fundamental powerlessness in their relationship. By February 2012, their evening encounters had evolved into domestic routine. Tamer would arrive with dinner ingredients. They would cook together, watch television, and talk late into the evening about dreams that seemed possible in the apartment's privacy, but impossible in Dubai's harsh social reality. The apartment had become more emotionally real to him than his Emirates Hills villa, and Rowena had become more essential to his happiness than his official family. "I want to make this permanent," he said one evening in March, taking her hands in his. "I want you to be my wife." Rowena stared at him, understanding the impossibility of what he suggested. "You already have a wife, family, a life that doesn't include me officially." "In my heart, you are my wife," Tamer replied earnestly. "We can have a private ceremony, just us with witnesses. It will make everything legitimate between us." The civil ceremony took place in April 2012 at a small Sharjah registration office, witnessed by two Pakistani men Tamer had hired for discretion. The marriage certificate listed false names and occupations, creating legal documentation that existed parallel to official records. For Rowena, The ceremony provided emotional legitimacy for their relationship, even though she understood its severe limitations. For Tamer, it offered psychological justification for maintaining a second household while protecting his primary family status and his business reputation. "Now you are truly my second family," he told her after the brief ceremony. "This is real, even if the world can't know about it yet." The marriage formalized dependencies that had been building for months. Rowena's complete reliance on Tamer's support was now couched in terms of spousal obligation rather than charity. Her isolation from the Filipino community became protection of their marital privacy. Her acceptance of secrecy became loyalty to their shared commitment and their future together. The emotional sanctuary Tamer had created served his needs while creating dependencies she couldn't escape without destroying not only her own future but her family's improved circumstances. What had begun as his attraction to a household employee had evolved into an obsession that would consume both their lives, built on deception and sustained by her vulnerability and his growing emotional investment in their alternative life together. Neither recognized they were constructing the foundation for a tragedy that would unfold over 8 years, culminating in violence that would expose the carefully maintained lies sustaining their hidden relationship and destroy everything they had built together. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines that changed everything. Rowena stared at the plastic indicator on a humid March morning in 2012, hands trembling as terror and hope fought for dominance in her chest. After months of nausea attributed to stress and irregular eating, the reality of her condition struck like lightning through the Qusais apartment's small bathroom. When Tamer arrived that evening, she met him at the door with the test clutched in her palm. His face drained of color as understanding hit, followed immediately by panic that made him pace the small living room like a caged animal. "This changes everything," he whispered, running hands through his hair. "My family, my business, my reputation. Everything could be destroyed if this becomes public." But as initial shock subsided over following days, something unexpected emerged in Tamer's response. During his childhood in Lebanon, his own father had died when he was 12, leaving him with profound regrets about missed connections and unspoken love. The prospect of becoming a father awakened instincts he hadn't known existed, buried beneath years of business focus and social obligation. "We'll make this work," he told Rowena a week later, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "This child will have everything I can provide, regardless of the complications." Medical care became an elaborate exercise in deception requiring careful planning and substantial cash payments. Private clinics in Sharjah accepted payment for prenatal visits conducted under assumed names that protected both their identities. Rowena became Rania Ibrahim, wife of businessman Ahmed Ibrahim, whose documentation appeared authentic enough to satisfy medical staff focused on providing care rather than investigating backgrounds. Monthly visits revealed a healthy pregnancy progressing normally, despite the stress inherent in their circumstances. Tamer's attentiveness intensified dramatically as Rowena's condition became apparent. Evening visits now included prenatal vitamins, specialized foods rich in nutrients essential for fetal development, and pregnancy books translated into English that they would read together on the apartment's small sofa. Her isolation, previously a source of loneliness, now felt like protective cocooning around their developing child. Discussions about their child's future consumed hours of evening conversations. Would the baby be raised bilingual, learning both Arabic and Tagalog to honor both parents' heritage? How would they explain the father's absence during daytime hours as the child grew older? What name would they choose that honored both Lebanese and Filipino heritage, while remaining pronounceable in Dubai's multicultural environment? The question of legal identity proved more complex than either had anticipated. Birth certificates required father's acknowledgement, but using Tamer's real name would create official records linking him to a second family. False documentation provided immediate solutions while creating long-term complications about inheritance, citizenship, and educational opportunities that would affect their child's entire future. "Our child will have better opportunities than most," Tamer assured Rowena during one planning session. "Money can solve many problems that others face, even if we must be creative about official recognition." Labor began on a cool November evening, Dubai's brief winter providing relief from the oppressive heat that had made Rowena's final trimester particularly uncomfortable. The private hospital in Sharjah had been selected for its discretion and distance from Dubai's main medical centers, where Tamer might encounter business associates or family friends who would recognize him. The birth certificate listed the father as Ahmed Ibrahim, businessman, a fictitious identity that would protect Tamer's official family while providing their son with legal documentation. The weight of creating false records troubled Rowena, but the alternative, raising a child with no legal father, seemed worse for their son's future prospects in a society that valued paternal recognition. Holding his newborn son for the first time, Tamer experienced overwhelming paternal love that surprised him with its intensity. The tiny boy, weighing 3.2 kilograms with dark hair and eyes that would eventually match his father's, represented both achievement and responsibility that transcended his business successes and social standing. They named him Jamal, meaning beauty, in Arabic while remaining easily pronounceable for Rowena's Filipino relatives. The choice reflected their hope for a child who could bridge both cultures while flourishing in Dubai's international environment, despite the unusual circumstances of his birth and family structure. The immediate challenges of infant care in isolation proved more daunting than either had anticipated. Rowena had no female relatives to provide traditional postpartum support, no community of mothers to share experiences and advice. Tamer's evening visits became extended caregiving sessions where he would feed, diaper, and comfort Jamal while Rowena recovered from delivery complications that required careful monitoring. His dual life intensified as newborn needs competed with family obligations in Emirates Hills. Amal noticed his frequent evening absences and increased distraction during family gatherings, but attributed these changes to expanding business pressures rather than paternal responsibilities she couldn't imagine. His careful explanations about complex projects and demanding clients provided plausible cover for his secret family obligations. Jamal's development became Tamer's secret obsession and greatest source of joy. First smiles at 6 weeks, rolling over at 4 months, sitting independently at 7 months. Every milestone was witnessed during their evening visits and celebrated with intensity that reflected both joy and grief over the moments he couldn't share openly with extended family or friends. By age 2, Jamal understood that Baba visited in the evenings but lived somewhere else during the day. The child's easy acceptance of this arrangement both relieved and saddened Tamer, who recognized that his son was learning to compartmentalize relationships in ways that mirrored his own psychological divisions and adaptation to impossible circumstances. Private tutoring began early, with emphasis on Arabic fluency that would provide educational advantages in UAE schools, complemented by English instruction that honored Rowena's linguistic heritage and educational background. Tamer spared no expense on educational resources, toys, and books that would stimulate his son's intellectual development and prepare him for success despite his unusual family circumstances. Rowena's transformation from dependent caretaker to confident mother changed the apartment's dynamics significantly. Maternal instincts awakened assertiveness she had never displayed, leading to increased demands for recognition and security for their child. The grateful employee who had accepted Tamer's support evolved into a protective mother who expected commitment matching her sacrifices and their child's needs. Financial support expanded beyond basic living expenses to include substantial savings accounts established for Jamal's future education and inheritance. Tamer opened investment accounts under his false identity, building wealth that could support his son's needs while remaining separate from his official family's financial structures and legal complications. The genuine family unit that developed within their constrained circumstances created emotional bonds that transcended the deception underlying their relationship. Evening routines included homework assistance, bedtime stories, and family discussions about daily events that felt more authentic than many interactions in Tamer's official household, where social expectations often overshadowed genuine intimacy. But as Jamal grew older, cracks began appearing in their carefully constructed isolation. The child's questions about why Baba couldn't attend school events, why they lived alone, why other families looked different, revealed the psychological costs of secrecy that would only intensify as he matured and his social awareness developed. Tamer's expanding business interests required international travel that reduced visit frequency from nightly to several times weekly. Projects in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar demanded extended absences that left Rowena feeling increasingly abandoned despite continued financial support. The loneliness of raising a child in isolation began taking its toll on her mental health and their relationship stability. His official family's demands also intensified as Khalil and Yasmin reached university age. Tuition expenses, travel costs, and social obligations required attention and resources that competed with his hidden family's needs. The mathematical impossibility of satisfying both families' expectations created stress that manifested in shortened visits and emotional distance that Rowena interpreted as abandonment. Rowena's growing frustration with their arrangement began surfacing in direct confrontations about Jamal's future. She wanted their son enrolled in better schools, introduced to his father's extended family, and provided with inheritance security that would require legal acknowledgement. Her demands for recognition increased proportionally with her confidence as a mother protecting her child's interests. "How long will you keep us hidden?" became her regular question during Tamer's visits. Jamal deserves better than this pretense. He deserves to know his real family. Financial strain from maintaining double households, combined with Dubai's economic challenges affecting the construction sector, created pressures that made Tamer's dual life increasingly unsustainable. The perfect balance he had maintained for 6 years was beginning to collapse under its own contradictions and the growing needs of both families. By 2018, the foundation of their hidden family was crumbling under accumulated pressure. Jamal's growing awareness of his unusual circumstances, Rowena's increasing demands for legitimacy, and Tamer's guilt-driven emotional withdrawal created a powder keg that would soon explode in violence that would destroy everything they had built together over 8 careful years. The enrollment forms for Dubai International Academy lay spread across the apartment's small dining table like accusations written in bureaucratic language. Rowena stared at sections requiring father's documentation, legal guardianship papers, and family residency verification. All impossible to complete, honestly. Jamal, now 6 years old and academically ready for grade 1, deserved better than the overcrowded public school where his false documentation might go unquestioned but his intellectual potential would remain unrealized. "We need proper papers," Rowena told Tamer during his evening visit in January 2018. "Jamal is asking why he can't attend the same schools as other children in our building. Their fathers pick them up, attend parent meetings, participate in sports events. He notices everything and asks questions I can't answer honestly." The conversation that followed revealed the impossible mathematics of their situation. Quality private schools required extensive documentation that would expose their deception. International curricula demanded parental involvement that Tamer couldn't provide without risking discovery. Even tutoring services asked probing questions about family circumstances that made sustained educational planning increasingly difficult. Jamal's growing awareness of his different circumstances manifested in behavioral changes that troubled both parents deeply. The cheerful child who had accepted his father's evening-only presence now asked pointed questions about why other families lived together, why Baba couldn't attend school events, and why they had no grandparents, uncles, or cousins to visit during holidays. "Am I adopted?" became his recurring question, followed by increasingly sophisticated inquiries about family structures that demonstrated intellectual development outpacing his emotional understanding of their situation. His intelligence made deception harder to maintain and created new pressures neither parent had anticipated. The social isolation that had protected their secret now felt like imprisonment limiting their son's development. Jamal's friendships with neighborhood children exposed him to normal family dynamics that highlighted the abnormality of his own situation. Birthday parties required explanations about absent fathers. School projects about family history revealed gaps that couldn't be filled honestly, and playdates with classmates' families created awkward situations requiring elaborate deceptions. Rowena's demands for recognition intensified proportionally with her son's growing questions and social awareness. "He needs his real name," she insisted during increasingly frequent arguments with Tamer. "He deserves inheritance rights, legal protection, acknowledgement of his father's identity. This pretense is damaging him psychologically. I can see it in his behavior at school." The legal complexities of providing Jamal with legitimate recognition seemed insurmountable given Dubai's family law structure. UAE personal status law recognized children born within registered marriages, but acknowledgement of a second family would require divorce proceedings, asset division, and public exposure that would destroy Tamer's reputation and business relationships. The alternative, maintaining the deception indefinitely, appeared equally impossible as their son matured and his questions became more sophisticated. Tamer's resistance to any form of official recognition reflected his terror of exposure and its cascading consequences. His construction company's government contracts depended on maintaining an unblemished reputation in Dubai's conservative business environment. Social standing within Lebanon's expatriate community required adherence to traditional family values that didn't accommodate second wives or children born outside recognized marriages. The financial implications of official acknowledgement could bankrupt both families while providing his secret son with rights that might destroy his legitimate children's inheritance. The arguments that consumed their evening time together grew increasingly bitter as previously harmonious discussions devolved into accusations and ultimatums. Rowena accused Tamer of treating their son as a shameful secret rather than a beloved child deserving recognition. Tamer countered that her demands threatened to destroy everything he had built over decades of careful reputation management and business development. "You want me to sacrifice my entire family for yours?" he said during one particularly heated exchange in spring 2018. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've built. You want me to throw it away for impossible demands that would ruin multiple lives?" "Your son is not impossible," Rowena replied, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "He exists. He's your flesh and blood. He deserves recognition, not perpetual hiding like some dirty secret you're ashamed of." The financial pressures underlying their relationship intensified as Dubai's construction sector faced economic challenges that directly affected Hadad Construction's cash flow and profitability. Government contract payments slowed due to budget constraints following oil price fluctuations, private development projects stalled amid financing difficulties, and competition from international firms reduced profit margins on new ventures. Maintaining dual households during economic uncertainty created mathematical problems that threatened both families' accustomed lifestyles. The Emirates Hills villa required AED 50,000 monthly for maintenance, staff salaries, and utilities that reflected their social status. Khalil's London education cost AED 120,000 annually, while Yasmin's local university expenses, though smaller, were growing as she pursued graduate studies and participated in international programs. Simultaneously, Rowena's household expenses had grown beyond the original AED 13,000 monthly arrangement established 6 years earlier. Jamal's educational needs, medical care, and age-appropriate activities required additional funding that reflected normal child development costs. Her family in the Philippines faced medical emergencies that demanded increased remittances. Her father's heart surgery, her sister's university tuition, her mother's medication for diabetes complications requiring expensive treatments. The financial strain created an environment where Rowena began recognizing her leverage over Tamer's official life for the first time. Her knowledge of his business practices, family relationships, and social connections provided potential weapons that could be deployed if their arrangement became unsustainable. The realization that she possessed information capable of destroying his reputation marked a fundamental shift in their power dynamic that changed the nature of their relationship. "I know where you really spend your evenings," she said during one argument, her tone carrying implications that chilled him. "I know about the contracts, the relationships, the compromises you've made to build your empire. Your wife knows nothing about the real Tamer Hadad or where your priorities actually lie." The subtle threat underlying her words represented a form of emotional blackmail that poisoned their remaining intimacy and trust. What had begun as grateful dependence had evolved into mutual vulnerability that could explode into mutually assured destruction if their relationship deteriorated further. Rowena's mental health deteriorated under the combined pressures of isolation, uncertainty, and responsibility for raising a child in impossible circumstances. Years of living in secrecy, cut off from her cultural community and extended family support, created psychological wounds that manifested in paranoid thoughts about her safety and her son's future that kept her awake at night. She began imagining scenarios where Amal discovered their existence and plotted to eliminate the threat to her family's security and reputation. Late-night research on her phone revealed stories of domestic workers who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, cases of expatriate families using legal systems to remove inconvenient complications, examples of how money and influence could make problems vanish permanently in Gulf societies. What happens to us if something happens to you? Became her obsessive question during Tamer's visits. We have no legal protection, no family connections, no safety net. We could disappear and no one would ask questions or even notice we were gone. Jamal's behavioral changes reflected his sensitivity to the tension consuming their household atmosphere. The bright, curious child became withdrawn and anxious, asking fewer questions but watching his parents with intensity that suggested he understood more than they realized about their precarious situation. His school performance suffered as domestic stress affected his concentration and social interactions with classmates. Sleep disturbances, aggressive outbursts at school, and regression in toilet training signaled psychological distress that required professional intervention impossible to seek without exposing their circumstances. The very secrecy that protected their family unit was destroying their son's emotional development and creating trauma that would affect him for years. Tamer's guilt about his dual life created protective emotional distance that made him less available to both families when they needed him most. His official children noticed his distraction during family gatherings, while Rowena experienced his withdrawal as abandonment during their moments of greatest need and vulnerability. The discovery process that would expose their 8-year secret began with financial irregularities that Amal noticed during routine household budget reviews in late 2018. Regular transfers to accounts she didn't recognize, cash withdrawals in amounts unusual for Tamer's typical spending patterns, and charges at medical facilities where none of their family had received treatment created questions that demanded investigation. Her diplomatic background had taught her to notice patterns and inconsistencies that others might overlook or dismiss. Phone bills showing extended calls to numbers not in their contact lists, credit card charges at restaurants in neighborhoods they never visited, and fuel expenses suggesting regular travel to areas of Dubai they had no reason to frequent painted a picture of activities hidden from family scrutiny. The private investigator Amal hired initially focused on potential business improprieties or extramarital affairs that might threaten their family's financial security. Within weeks, surveillance had identified the apartment in Qusais, documented Tamer's regular visits, and photographed the woman and child who lived there in circumstances that clearly indicated long-term financial support. Bank records, rental agreements, utility bills, and medical records created an evidence trail that revealed the systematic nature of Tamer's deception over nearly 8 years. Witness testimonies from neighbors, shopkeepers, and service providers confirmed years of regular presence in a neighborhood where he claimed never to venture, establishing a pattern of deliberate deception. Digital evidence, including CCTV footage from the apartment building, phone records showing thousands of calls to Rowena's number, and financial transactions spanning 8 years built an unshakable case for deliberate, sustained deception on a scale that threatened everything Amal had believed about her marriage and family. The confrontation that would bring their carefully constructed lies crashing down was now inevitable. 8 years of secrets, dependencies, and growing resentments had created a powder keg that required only the spark of discovery to explode into violence that would destroy multiple lives and expose the human cost of impossible choices made in Dubai's unforgiving social hierarchy. The family meeting convened in the main salon of the Emirates Hills villa on March 14, 2019, as Dubai's evening call to prayer echoed across the affluent neighborhood. Amal Farrick sat at the head of their dining table. Private investigators' photographs spread before her like evidence in a criminal trial. Khalil and Yasmin flanked her sides, their faces reflecting the shock and disgust that had consumed them since learning about their father's secret life. "Tomorrow evening, we end this charade," Amal announced, her diplomat's training evident in the controlled fury underlying her measured words. "Your father has made his choice over 8 years. Now we make ours." The evidence compilation had taken weeks of meticulous documentation that painted an undeniable picture of systematic deception. Bank statements showing AED 1.2 million transferred to Rowena Cruz over 8 years. Rental agreements for the Qusais apartment signed under false names that could be traced back to Tamer through financial records. Medical records from Sharjah Hospital documenting the birth of Jamal Ibrahim, with father listed as Ahmed Ibrahim, a transparent alias that fooled no one examining the financial paper trail. Legal consultation with Dubai's most prominent family law firm had outlined their options with clinical precision that offered multiple paths forward. Tamer's bigamous marriage violated UAE personal status law, creating grounds for immediate divorce and asset seizure. His systematic deception constituted fraud that could void their marriage contract and eliminate his claims to properties acquired during their union. The immigration violations involving false documentation could result in deportation for both Tamer and his secret family. We arrive at 9:30 p.m., Amal continued, consulting the investigators' detailed surveillance reports that documented Tamer's routine with mathematical precision. He'll be there for his usual evening visit. We catch him in the act, present our demands, and end this disgrace once and for all. The timing had been selected for maximum psychological impact and to ensure no escape routes. Tamer's established routine made his presence predictable, while the evening hour would ensure the woman and child were home to witness the confrontation. Surprise was essential. Any advance warning would allow him to construct explanations or coordinate with lawyers who might complicate their objectives. Khalil, home from London for spring break, struggled to reconcile the father he had admired with the man revealed in the investigators' photographs and financial records. How long has this been going on? How could we not know he was living this double life? 8 years, Amal replied coldly, her voice carrying the weight of profound betrayal. 8 years of lies, stolen money, and family betrayal. While we trusted him, supported his business ventures, and celebrated his success, he was building another life with another woman and another child. Yasmin's anger manifested in questions about their own legitimacy and security that revealed the depth of damage to their family foundation. If their father could maintain such elaborate deceptions, what other lies might he have told? How much of their family's wealth had been diverted to support his secret household? What legal vulnerabilities did his crimes create for their inheritance and future security? The objectives for their confrontation were straightforward but comprehensive. Immediate termination of financial support to the secret family, signed confession of his deceptions that could be used in divorce proceedings, and guarantees that no blackmail attempts would emerge from ending the relationship. If Tamer refused cooperation, they were prepared to implement backup plans involving police reports, immigration authorities, and business partners who needed to know about his character flaws. The drive to Qusais on March 15 felt like a military operation designed to reclaim their family's honor. Amal's Range Rover contained copies of all evidence, legal documents prepared by their attorneys, and contact information for police and immigration officials who could be summoned if the situation required official intervention. Khalil and Yasmin accompanied her for witness purposes and emotional support during what promised to be the most difficult confrontation of their lives. Building C in Block 7 represented everything their family had risen above through decades of hard work and careful social positioning. Modest concrete construction, crowded parking areas, and the sounds of multiple families living in proximity that their villa's isolation had eliminated. The investigators' photographs hadn't captured the oppressive ordinariness of the place where their father had chosen to create his alternative life. At 9:47 p.m., 17 minutes after their planned arrival time, they climbed the stairs to apartment 304. The sounds from within, a child's voice asking questions, a woman's responses, the television playing Filipino programming, provided audio confirmation of the domestic scene they were about to shatter forever. Amal's knock was authoritative and demanding, the sound of someone accustomed to having doors opened immediately without question. The silence that followed suggested recognition of danger by the apartment's occupants, followed by whispered consultations about how to respond to unexpected visitors at this hour. When the door finally opened, Rowena Cruz appeared exactly as the surveillance photographs had shown. Petite, attractive, and now visibly terrified as she recognized the woman whose home she had once cleaned and whose husband she had stolen. Behind her, 6-year-old Jamal peered around his mother's legs with curious eyes that held unmistakable resemblance to the Hadad family features. "We need to talk," Amal announced in English, pushing past Rowena into the apartment without invitation or permission. "About your arrangement with my husband and the life you've stolen from our family." The small living room, furnished modestly but comfortably, told the story of sustained financial support and careful domestic management over many years. Children's toys, educational books, and family photographs created an atmosphere of genuine home life that made the confrontation more disturbing rather than less. This wasn't temporary exploitation. It was a parallel family that had existed alongside their own for nearly a decade. Khalil and Yasmin entered behind their mother, their presence transforming the apartment's familiar intimacy into a hostile tribunal where Rowena and Jamal faced judgment from the family whose existence had shadowed their entire lives. The power dynamics were immediately apparent: wealthy, educated, legally protected family confronting isolated domestic worker with no legal standing or support system. "Where is he?" Amal demanded, surveying the apartment for signs of Tamer's presence and personal belongings. "We know he comes here every evening. We know about the money, the fake marriage, the child. We know everything about your deception." Rowena's response came in broken English, punctuated by Tagalog phrases she whispered to herself like protective prayers. She claimed not to know when Tamer would arrive, insisted their relationship was legitimate and based on love, begged them not to hurt her son who had done nothing wrong. Her desperation was palpable as she realized the confrontation she had feared for years was finally happening. The sound of keys in the apartment door at 10:03 p.m. brought the evening's central drama into sharp focus. Tamer entered carrying groceries and a children's book, his expression shifting from domestic contentment to absolute horror as he discovered his two families occupying the same space for the first time in 8 years. "Explain this," Amal commanded, gesturing toward the domestic scenes surrounding them that represented years of systematic betrayal. "Explain 8 years of lies, stolen money, and family betrayal. Explain how you could look us in the face every day while living this double life." The accusations that followed came in waves that overwhelmed any possibility of rational discussion or defense. Theft of family resources to support his secret household. Fraud in creating false documentation for bigamous marriage. Emotional abuse of his legitimate family through systematic deception spanning nearly a decade. Potential criminal violations that could result in imprisonment and deportation for all involved. Tamer's position was completely indefensible given the evidence arrayed against him. No explanation could justify the elaborate deceptions or the financial costs imposed on his legitimate family without their knowledge. No argument could reconcile his duties as husband and father with his maintenance of a second household. His silence in the face of their accusations confirmed guilt more effectively than any confession could have. The breaking point came when Amal delivered their ultimatum with the finality of a judicial sentence. Immediate termination of all support to Rowena and Jamal, signed confession of his deceptions for use in divorce proceedings, and guarantee that no blackmail attempts would emerge from ending their relationship. Failure to comply would result in police involvement, immigration authorities, and public exposure that would destroy his business reputation permanently. Rowena's response to these threats revealed the desperation of someone facing the destruction of her entire world and her child's future. 8 years of isolation, financial dependence, and emotional manipulation had left her with no resources except the kitchen knife she grabbed during her panicked retreat toward the apartment's small cooking area. "You want to destroy us?" she screamed, the blade trembling in her hand as maternal instincts overrode rational thinking and years of careful submission. "You want to take everything and leave us with nothing. I won't let you hurt my son or destroy our family." The violence that followed happened with shocking speed that left everyone stunned by its intensity. Amal's attempt to approach and disarm Rowena resulted in defensive slashing that opened deep cuts across her forearm and shoulder. Khalil's intervention to protect his mother led to wounds across his chest as the small apartment became a battleground where furniture overturned and blood splattered across walls that had previously known only domestic tranquility. The chaos lasted less than 90 seconds before neighbors' emergency calls brought police sirens approaching the building with increasing volume. By the time law enforcement arrived, Amal lay critically injured while Khalil pressed towels against his wounds. Yasmin crouched in the corner comforting a traumatized Jamal, while Tamer stood paralyzed between his bleeding wife and the woman he had claimed to love. Rowena's arrest came after brief resistance as shock replaced rage, and she realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. The knife clattered to the floor as handcuffs secured her wrists, while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize Amal's blood loss and assess the severity of Khalil's injuries. The media explosion began within hours as word of the confrontation leaked through hospital staff and police reports that couldn't contain such a dramatic story. Dubai businessman's secret family exposed in violent confrontation became headline news across Gulf media outlets, while international coverage focused on domestic worker rights and the cultural pressures that created such desperate circumstances. Hadad Construction's stock price collapsed as government contracts were suspended pending investigation of Tamer's character and legal status. Business partners distanced themselves from scandal that threatened their own reputations, while banks froze accounts until legal proceedings could determine legitimate ownership of assets acquired through potentially fraudulent means. The perfect facade that had defined the Hadad family for 25 years lay in ruins, destroyed by the collision between official respectability and hidden truth that had been building toward violence for 8 years. The blood-stained apartment in Qusais had become the stage where carefully constructed lies finally, violently, collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. The Dubai Criminal Court became the epicenter of international media attention as the case of Rowena Cruz versus the state of UAE opened on September 16, 2019. The charges filed against her: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and immigration violations, carried potential sentences of up to 25 years in prison. Simultaneously, Tamer Hadad faced charges of bigamy, fraud, and systematic deception that could result in deportation and permanent business license revocation. Defense attorney Sarah Al-Mahmoud, one of Dubai's most prominent criminal lawyers, built Rowena's case around temporary insanity caused by years of psychological abuse and systematic isolation. The defense strategy portrayed her not as a calculating criminal, but as a desperate mother protecting her child from threats she genuinely believed could result in their elimination. Expert psychiatric testimony described the mental deterioration caused by 8 years of secrecy, dependency, and social isolation that had created paranoid ideation and hypervigilance about potential threats to her survival. "My client lived in constant fear," Al-Mahmoud argued during opening statements that set the tone for the entire trial. Fear of discovery, fear of abandonment, fear for her child's safety and future. When confronted by the very people she had been conditioned to see as threats to her existence, maternal instincts overwhelmed rational thinking, leading to defensive actions that she deeply regrets. Cultural experts testified about the particular vulnerabilities faced by Filipino domestic workers in Gulf countries, where visa restrictions, language barriers, and social isolation created conditions conducive to exploitation and psychological manipulation. Dr. Amina Hassan, a specialist in domestic worker trauma, explained how the power imbalances inherent in such relationships could produce Stockholm Syndrome-like dependencies that made escape impossible even when circumstances became clearly abusive. The prosecution, led by Chief Prosecutor Ahmad al-Rashid, painted a different picture of calculated violence by someone who had benefited from financial arrangements far exceeding typical domestic worker compensation. They argued that Rowena's attack on Amal constituted premeditated assault by someone who recognized that exposure of her relationship would end her comfortable lifestyle and financial support for her family in the Philippines. The defendant lived in luxury compared to other domestic workers, al-Rashid stated during his opening arguments. She received AED 156,000 annually plus accommodation, medical care, and support for her extended family. When threatened with loss of these benefits, she chose violence rather than legal remedies available through proper channels. Financial forensics revealed the full scope of Tamer's deception that had funded their secret relationship over 8 years. A $1.8 million transferred to Rowena's accounts, plus property rental costs, medical expenses, and educational investments for Jamal that brought total expenditures to nearly AED 2.5 million. The prosecution characterized these payments as theft from his legitimate family, arguing that Amal and their children had been unknowingly subsidizing his secret household through reduced family income and delayed business investments. The media circus surrounding the trial attracted international coverage focusing on domestic worker rights, polygamy laws, and the hidden social dynamics of Gulf expatriate society that rarely received such scrutiny. CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera provided daily coverage of proceedings, while human rights organizations used the case to highlight systemic vulnerabilities faced by migrant workers throughout the region. Public opinion divided sharply along cultural and gender lines that reflected broader social tensions in Dubai's multicultural society. Many expatriate women expressed sympathy for Amal as a victim of marital betrayal and financial fraud, while Filipino community organizations rallied support for Rowena as someone exploited by circumstances beyond her control. Social media campaigns using hashtags like #JusticeForRowena and #ProtectDubaiWives reflected the polarized responses to a case that exposed uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and vulnerability. Tamer's testimony proved devastating for both legal proceedings and his remaining reputation in Dubai's business community. Under oath, he provided full disclosure of their relationship's development, the systematic deception required to maintain dual households, and his emotional attachment to both Rowena and Jamal that had made ending the arrangement impossible despite its obvious unsustainability. "I loved them both," he admitted during cross-examination that left the courtroom silent. "My official family and my secret family. I thought I could provide for everyone, protect everyone, satisfy everyone's needs. I was wrong, and my selfishness destroyed multiple lives." His confession revealed the elaborate financial structures created to support their arrangement, shell companies, false documentation, and cash transactions designed to avoid detection by either family law authorities or business partners who might question his integrity. The systematic nature of his deception impressed even prosecutors with its sophistication and duration. Amal's victim impact statement provided the trial's most emotionally powerful moment, as she described 25 years of marriage she now recognized as built on fundamental lies that had shaped every aspect of their shared life. Her physical injuries from the knife attack had healed, but the psychological trauma of discovering her husband's secret life continued affecting her daily functioning, social relationships, and ability to trust future personal connections. "He didn't just betray our marriage," she testified with quiet dignity that commanded the courtroom's attention. "He stole my sense of reality, my confidence in my own perceptions, my belief in the life we had built together. Every memory is now contaminated by wondering what else was happening that I didn't know about." The custody battle over 6-year-old Jamal became a tragic subplot highlighting the inadequacy of legal systems designed for conventional family structures. UAE family law provided no framework for children born from bigamous relationships, while Philippine law offered limited protection for citizens born abroad under disputed circumstances. The child's stateless condition reflected the legal complexities created by his parents' deception. Temporary custody was granted to the Philippine embassy, while social services conducted assessments of potential placement options that would serve the child's best interests. Jamal's psychological evaluation revealed significant trauma from witnessing the violent confrontation, combined with identity confusion about his parentage and legitimate family connections. Child psychologists recommended extensive therapy and gradual integration with either his mother's or father's extended family, but political and legal obstacles complicated both options. The verdicts delivered on February 14, 2020, satisfied no one completely while attempting to balance justice, deterrence, and recognition of the complex circumstances underlying the tragedy. Rowena received 12 years imprisonment for assault with a deadly weapon, with possibility of parole after 8 years contingent on psychological rehabilitation and victim compensation. The sentence acknowledged both the severity of her actions and the psychological factors that contributed to her breakdown. Tamer's punishment included conviction on bigamy and fraud charges resulting in 5 years imprisonment, AED 500,000 in fines, and permanent revocation of his business license. Additional civil penalties required him to compensate Amal for medical expenses, emotional damages, and financial losses estimated at AED 3.2 million. The comprehensive punishment reflected the court's determination to deter similar deceptions while addressing the multiple victims created by his actions. Immigration consequences proved equally severe for all involved parties. Rowena faced immediate deportation upon completion of her prison sentence, with permanent prohibition from re-entering the UAE. Jamal's repatriation to the Philippines was arranged through diplomatic channels, though questions about his long-term care and identity formation remained unresolved. The business liquidation of Hadad Construction International proceeded rapidly as government contracts were canceled and private partnerships dissolved. The company's assets were distributed among creditors, employee compensation funds, and victim restitution accounts, leaving Tamer financially ruined and professionally destroyed. Systemic reforms emerged from the tragedy's aftermath as UAE authorities recognized the need for improved domestic worker protections and oversight mechanisms. New regulations required regular welfare checks, independent complaint processes, and stronger penalties for employers who violated worker rights or created exploitative conditions. The kafala sponsorship system underwent modifications, allowing greater worker mobility and legal protections. Cultural discussions about traditional marriage expectations versus modern realities occupied prominent space in Gulf media and academic discourse. Religious scholars debated interpretations of family law that might accommodate complex social circumstances while maintaining moral frameworks that discourage deception and exploitation. 5 years after the confrontation, the participants' lives reflected the permanent consequences of choices made during their 8-year secret arrangement. Amal had rebuilt her life as an independent advocate for domestic worker rights, using her diplomatic background and personal experience to promote systematic reforms. Her relationship with Khalil and Yasmin had recovered from the initial trauma, though family gatherings remained shadowed by memories of their father's betrayal. Khalil completed his London education and returned to Dubai to work in sustainable development, deliberately choosing a career path that avoided his father's construction industry. Yasmin pursued graduate studies in international law with focus on migrant worker protections, channeling her family's trauma into advocacy for vulnerable populations. Tamer's social ostracism proved complete and permanent. Released from prison in 2023, he lived in modest accommodation in Sharjah, working as a construction supervisor for companies that didn't recognize his previous prominence. Former business associates and social connections maintained distance from someone whose name remained associated with scandal and deception. Rowena's adaptation to prison life demonstrated resilience that had sustained her through previous challenges. Letters from the Philippines revealed her family's continued struggles despite years of her financial support, while her correspondence with human rights advocates helped document systemic problems facing other domestic workers in similar circumstances. Jamal's childhood in the Philippines, raised by Rowena's relatives, included gradual understanding of the tragedy that had shaped his early years. Now 11 years old, he struggled with identity questions about his father, his legal status, and his future opportunities that remained limited by circumstances beyond his control. The memory and legacy of their tragedy influenced Dubai's domestic worker landscape through improved legal protections, awareness campaigns, and support networks designed to prevent similar exploitation. Yet ongoing investigations revealed that hidden families continued existing throughout the Gulf region, suggesting that systemic vulnerabilities remained despite regulatory reforms. The human cost of secrecy, power imbalances, and desperate choices made in impossible circumstances had destroyed multiple lives while exposing uncomfortable truths about social hierarchies that created such vulnerabilities. The blood-stained apartment in Qusais stood as a monument to the consequences of building relationships on deception, dependency, and the illusion that complex human needs could be satisfied through compartmentalized lives that inevitably, violently collide with reality.